Follows on Media. This is Coming Out Stories. It's a podcast about one of the most important conversations of your life. I'm Emma Goswell. Time to hear from Britain's first out Muslim drag queen, Asifa Lahore. This is a good example of someone coming out twice. Asifa came out first as a gay man and then later as a trans woman. You'll have to excuse a bit of background noise in this interview. We were in central London and this particular Turkish restaurant was the quietest place that we could find near Leicester Square.
I didn't always believe I was female. When I hit puberty, I kind of realised I was attracted to boys. And I guess at the time, because like trans visibility was so low, I'm chatting about like the late 90s. I didn't see any trans people around me here. I'm born and bred London, so I didn't actually see a lot of trans people around me. I saw a lot of gay people, so I just assumed that I was gay.
And did you articulate it to anybody then and tell people that you were gay? Did you ever come out to your family as gay?
Oh God, no. So obviously, like, I'm from a British Muslim background. Mm-hmm. My parents are from Pakistan, and I'm proud of all those identities. But when I was growing up, I felt really conflicted, and I felt like I couldn't be myself. And coming out was, God, it was never on the table. It was one thing that I don't think I would have. I thought at the time I'd never have the courage to tell my parents about me being who I am.
Why? What did you fear the reaction would be?
I think at the time I just assumed that they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand because, number one, in like my mother languages of Urdu and Punjabi, like there's no word for gay,
Really?
or that I knew of at the time. You obviously know that, you know, the word gay exists, the word lesbian, bisexual, but in my home languages, I have no idea how to say it. And the other thing I thought, obviously, was religion would play a part. So growing up, I inherently knew that it was wrong to be gay in Islam, but I didn't know why, but I just knew it was wrong. So I just kind of didn't tell anyone.
So were you actively going to the mosque? Were you actually involved in going to prayer?
Yes, I mean, throughout my life, I wouldn't class myself as someone who's like staunch by the book Muslim. I mean, many people would consider me very bad in the sense that, you know, I don't pray 5 times a day. I'm lucky if I make the mosque once a week. I fast during Ramadan and I give to charity, and I believe in God. But, you know, many people would consider me quite a liberal Muslim, shall we say.
So, as a child, you're busy going to the mosque and not really having this conversation. Presumably, at some point, you came around and thought, do you know what, I've got the strength, this is the right time to actually articulate it and tell my parents that I'm gay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you exactly when it was. So I sort of came out in 2 stages as gay. One was when my younger sister found my diary. I was 16, she was 10. And she came to me and she said, look, I know I've been reading your diary. And I was like really upset that she had found out. I know, tell me about it.
Bad sister.
Really sneak into my room. But yeah, she basically kind of confirmed to me what I'd known my entire life. She was like, look, I'm cool with it. Just don't tell mum and dad because they're not going to understand and it will cause a lot of trouble. So I kept it to myself, and it was only when I was like 22, 23, and I was at university, and that's when I kind of came out and all hell broke loose.
In what sense?
So obviously my mum and dad did not understand what it was to be gay. At first they thought maybe there was something, you know, something wrong with me sexually, in the sense that maybe, I don't know. I remember my dad actually asking me, is there anything wrong with your equipment or something? Or are you having like, I know, right? But, and discussing so many like personal things with your mum and dad is like cringe.
So it was a sit down actual conversation in the front room type thing?
Oh, not in the front room, in my bedroom.
Okay.
It was literally me, my mum and my dad. Like, I don't think they wanted anyone else to hear what was going on. But they ended up basically taking me to like the local GP, because in their world they thought, okay, there is something like medically wrong here. And obviously, like, the doctor, who again was from an Asian background, in his 60s, really stood up for me. And he said, look, you know, there's nothing that I can prescribe your son, and I understand the struggles and the challenges around like culture and religion, but this is something you're going to have to deal with as a family. So I was then taken to the mosque, and I ended up discussing so many things like with my imam, including like, there were a few things on the table. One was celibacy, which was never going to happen. I mean, at that point, I was not going to tell my folks and my community that I wasn't a virgin, but I wasn't.
But you actually discussed this with the imam in the mosque?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, celibacy was it was like, if you remain celibate and, you don't have same-sex relationships, you'll be fine. That was never ever going to happen. The second thing that was really put on the table was marriage to a female, and the idea that if you marry, then it will cure you. Like, oh, you haven't had sex with a woman yet. Once you're married and you have sex and you have children, it's kind of like that side of you you'll forget that side of you. Like, it won't ever happen.
So you must have felt very isolated in the sense that nobody understood what you were really going through.
Oh yeah, I felt super isolated. I mean, my gay friends did not really understand. They were like, oh, why don't you just reject it? Why don't you just leave the family? And my Muslim friends obviously did not really know about me. I mean, I was living like double life, and under that pressure at the time of sort of coming out, I fell into like a really dark depression, and I ended up agreeing to like marriage to like my first cousin in Pakistan, and I was in that engagement for a good 6 months.
And did you meet this woman?
Oh God, yeah, I used to play around with my cousin like when I was, young on frequent trips to Pakistan. There was a period in my life where like in my early teenage years I lived in Pakistan for 3 years, so I knew her, and we were always good friends. But when this whole shebang happened, it kind of, I fell like into a really dark depression, and it was only when I was put in touch with like LGBT charities in London, where I began getting counselling and where I began getting support. I began meeting other gay Muslims and other, LGBT Asian people. And I kid you not, Emma, up until that point, I really believed I was the only Asian gay in the village. Like, really, 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 I did.
And that's a hard place to be, right?
Really hard, like, because I kind of, like, felt like I was like a soldier at the time, battling everything on my own. And you can't battle all these things on your own, all these issues. And it's only when I felt like, okay, I found my people, I found my tribe. I went back to, like, my mum and dad, and I said, look, I'm not going through with this. I'm definitely gay. I'm not going to be forced into a marriage to my female cousin. And although, my mum and dad were like, okay, fine, there's nothing we can't, no one can be forced to do this, it did create quite a rift in the family because, my first cousin is such a close relationship, and it stopped me, like, going to Pakistan for such a long time because I was kind of a bit scared, a bit ashamed, a bit like, why did I do that?
Did she accept it? Did her family accept it in the end?
Not at the time, but years later, like, once I'd come out and once, once I'd like established a successful drag career, once I was out to the world, and once I went back to Pakistan, like, a good 10 years after that incident, they understood then. I mean, now I've made amends with my cousin in Pakistan. She's gone on to marry someone else, and she's got like 3 children. And the last time I went to Pakistan was about end of last year, in November 2019, and literally I just was around her place playing with her kids, and everything now is fine, but at the time it wasn't at all.
Yeah. So during this time then, or sort of after it, were you identifying as a gay man and going out and having relationships with men?
Yeah, I ended up actually entering into a civil partnership with a gay Pakistani guy that I met at university.
Oh, wow.
And I was in that civil partnership for a really long time, the relationship in the whole I was in for a good 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents eventually kind of came round to the idea. My mum attended our ceremony and ended up giving me away, and my dad kind of years later ended up like, forging a really good relationship with him. I remember them like doing like DIY, and there was a lot of trust, a lot of love that was developed over the time of me coming out.
They really came round then by the sounds of it. That's brilliant that they were at your civil partnership.
Yeah, I mean, they were, kudos to my parents. I think not only did I go through such a journey of coming out, I think, my parents and my family really also had to go on their journey, and I'm in a really, really happy place with them at this point in my life.
So that's sort of one part of your life, isn't it? But then a few years later, you announced that you actually identified as trans, right?
Yes, if coming out once wasn't bad enough. So I began basically performing in drag, and that happened totally by accident. I was out one night clubbing and I saw a poster for a drag competition, entered it and kind of did really well and began getting bookings. And I sort of forged a drag career, which is still, amazing till this day.
Well, I remember interviewing you the first time because you were definitely Britain's first Muslim gay drag queen.
Yes. And, I still perform as Britain's first out Muslim drag queen. And it was during that drag career that I realised that for me, it was much more than just performing. It was... my drag has always been on the hyper feminine side in terms of aesthetic, in terms of appearance. And
lovely nails, by the way.
Thank you, darling. It's got to be done. And I realized really early on that I was trans, and that, for me, it wasn't just about performing, and I wanted to live as female.
I mean, you say early on. I mean, a lot of trans people that I speak to realise when they were children, realised, as young as the age of 4, I've spoken to people, but it sounds like it was a bit more of a later thing for you, and that it was somehow linked to drag through an awakening through that art form in a way.
Most definitely. I mean, I never ever it never sort of clocked for me that I was trans, and I think a lot of it also had to do with, I had to deal with a lot growing up, not just the sexuality thing, but also, guiding my life as a British Muslim and as an LGBT person. So it was only when I started performing in drag that it was like a hand fit in a glove. Something just clicked.
Did it just feel right wearing those clothes?
Totally. It felt so right, like wearing those clothes and wearing that makeup and those hairpieces and wigs, that I didn't want it just to be for a night only. I wanted it to be always. But again, it took me a good 4 years to kind of come to terms with that and speak to everyone about it, because the first time round was so traumatic to me that I was like, God, do I want to go through that whole coming out experience with my family and my partner? On top of being, at that point in my life, I was a public figure. I'd done like BBC documentaries, BBC debates. I'd been in a Channel 4 documentary. The world knew about me. And God, did I want to transition so publicly? It was a lot to kind of deal with and decide in a way. And what sort of made me realise that I had to be honest with myself was, here I was talking about authenticity, about people living their best lives, their authentic lives. I couldn't lie to myself. So I ended up telling my mum, telling my partner, and telling the world that I am trans.
Well, come on, speak about your family, but how did the conversation go then with your partner? Because, they're with you, they're civil partner to you, as a gay man being with a gay man, presumably.
Definitely. I was in the classic gay, civil partnership, a gay man into a gay man. And it was difficult. That was the main reason, I think, why it took me quite a while to come to terms with my transness, because I knew that my civil partnership would come to an end. Because for him, it was all about, although we're totally best friends, we left amicably, for him, he wanted to be in a relationship with another gay man. And I think me transitioning, and with my transition being super successful, the hormones worked really quickly. I totally understood for him it was about being with another gay man. And aesthetically, I changed very, very quickly when I was on hormone therapy.
It's almost heartbreaking in a way, though, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you're ecstatic and you're happy because you're finally living your true, authentic self. But on the other hand, you've lost the love of your life. And you knew that was going to happen by the sounds of it.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, at the time I was heartbroken. I'm not going to deny it. I spent a lot of time even contemplating maybe not transitioning because of it. But in the end, I just took those brave steps. And, I knew that he would always be a huge part of my life, just not, my lifelong partner. So I basically took those steps and, contacted my GP and began taking hormone therapy. And I'm glad because, 3 years down the line, I'm in a very happy place in the sense that I'm happy with who I am. I'm dating at the moment other people. I know he's in a long-term relationship that he's happy in. So in the long run, things have worked out.
So you've managed to stay friends, yeah?
Oh, God, yeah. I don't think you can go through that experience of coming out as gay, Muslim, and dealing with all those pressures and not remain friends.
And how did the conversation go with your family then? Because you'd already come out to them as a gay man and now coming out to them as a trans woman. How did that go down?
So, really weirdly, it was much easier coming out as trans and Muslim than it was coming out as gay and Muslim. And that's madness to think about this, but I think in hindsight the reason being is culturally, being from a South Asian background in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, it's absolutely legal to be trans. My parents sort of understood it because, they're well aware of trans people in Pakistan, and I think they were more concerned about my health than me, living my life as female. I think they were more concerned about how the hormones would work. And, I started my transition in this day and age relatively late. I started at 33. Okay. So I think they were more concerned about how that would pan out.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of Western parents would stereotypically struggle more with having a trans child than having a gay child. I think they understand it more. Gay people have been much more at the forefront of LGBT rights, haven't they? Gay and lesbians rather than trans people. But you're saying for your culture it was easier.
Totally, and that's the weird thing, is that here in the West we get the LGB and we're just about grappling with the T and trying to come to terms with it at the moment. In the East, and I'm talking not just about South Asia, I'm talking about East Asia with Thailand and Singapore and all the East Asian countries, the transgender lifestyle and the transgender way of being and living has been there for centuries, long before colonialism, long before, any sort of Western influence, shall we say. And as of now, I mean, it's easier to live as transgender than it is gay, lesbian or bisexual in that part of the world, which is really interesting because I feel like when it comes to sexual orientation, gender, the world definitely is divided.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. And I think in Indigenous American people have what we call two spirits, don't we? Two spirit people, and they sort of understand it as well.
Definitely, and also I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Australian Aborigines as well. Yeah. So it's there's a lot there in those parts of the world that where. For example, I'm currently going through this process of applying for Pakistani identity cards as a female. And it's interesting, I have a choice. In Pakistan, you can either be male, female, or third gender. So I'm entitled to either female or third gender identity card.
Oh, and what have you gone for?
Oh God, I've gone for female. Just because I've gone for the female, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. They see it as a lot more fluid, don't they, obviously?
Definitely, and I think, to be honest, I think that's the way forward, Emma. I think, with a newer generation now really, in many ways, probably more advanced in sexual orientation and gender fluidity than our generation. When I talk to my nephews and nieces who are in their teenage years, or I was at DragCon last month where I had 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds using pronouns like they and he and she, and really fluid. And I was like, wow, the world is changing.
Yeah. Is there anyone else that you've had to come out to in sort of terms of your career and friends that has been a difficult conversation?
I think you're constantly coming out. I think every LGBT plus person will tell you that you're constantly coming out to all sorts of people. I guess for me, the big thing was coming out to my relatives in Pakistan as trans. And that's only been the case, I think, in the last 2 years. A year into sort of transitioning, I asked my mum and said, look, I really want to go to Pakistan. I really want to go as female. I really want to tell the world in Pakistan who I am. And when I say the world, that really is my relatives. And I think I'd say a good 80% of them are super, super, super accepting. And then you've got the 20% that, we don't get invited to certain weddings anymore. We don't get invited to certain occasions anymore. And I think...
you're saying that with a smile on your face, but that must hurt.
I think, God, Emma, I'm 36 now, and I think I've got to a point in my life where I take everything with a pinch of salt now. And, if I look at and I balance things out, if 80% of my family in Pakistan are super accepting of me, I'm really not going to focus on that 20%. What's the point of focusing on the negative aspects in life? Just focus on the positive, because they're the ones that matter.
That is very good life advice about anything in general, really. People focus so much on the negative, don't they?
Well, come on. LGBT people and mental health, there's so much that we, I've really trained myself not to focus on negativities. And it's easier said than done, Emma. There are some days where I wake up and I just do not want to get out of bed because, it's so hard being LGBT and in today's world. We make it... Certain people may make it look so easy, but the reality is we have to juggle so many things and so much hatred and homophobia and transphobia.
Have you encountered any homophobia and transphobia? Sort of bullying?
Yes, more so here than over there in Pakistan, oddly enough. And I think, in recent years with so much, Brexit and politics being so up in the air in the UK, I think it's given a lot of people permission to say and do certain things. And, that's not just with LGBTness, that's with anything seen as other. Mm-hmm. So, whether you're a different race, whether you're from a different country, whether you speak a different language, or dare I say it, whether you look different, you've got a fantastic hairstyle, may I add.
Thank you.
But I'm sure that many, people with your hairstyle would get a lot of hate for all sorts of reasons, and it's sad that that we have to deal with that.
Well, I hope not. Although I've just come from an office just down the road where I got misgendered by the door staff. So there it goes on, doesn't it? For everybody, we all get it.
Totally. And it's just knowing how to deal with that. And I think, at 36, I think I've learned how to deal with it, but I also know that there's a lot of LGBT plus people that still need that support. And it's important that, they are aware that there's a lot of services and people out there that can help them.
Yeah, well, that neatly brings me on to my last question, really, which is just any advice that you would have for anyone else struggling with, what you've gone through in terms of struggling with your sexuality and your gender identity.
I think the best advice I can sort of give is don't feel like you're the only one. I think for years I thought I was the only one dealing with this shit, but the reality is that even though I'm from a minority community, there are so many other people like myself. And what I'd say is don't be afraid to reach out. It doesn't matter whether you live in busy cities like London or Manchester or Liverpool or what have you, or whether you live in the most rural parts of the country. Please don't be afraid to reach out, because the worst thing I think anyone can do is suffer in silence. There are plenty of friends for you yet to make. There's so many support groups out there, so many social groups. Whether it's talking to your teacher at school or whether it's trying to find a local community group, there's so much support out there. Don't feel like you have to go through this on your own.
I hope you enjoyed listening to my chat with Asifa Lahore. Again, apologies for the background noise. I have to say the Turkish coffee they served in that restaurant was spectacular, though. please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to find out more about this podcast, perhaps ask us a question or even offer yourself up for an interview, well, you can follow us at Come Out Stories on Twitter or Coming Out Stories Pod on Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Emma Goswell, and Coming Out Stories is a What Goes On media production. Next time you'll hear from Tim Sigsworth, MBE. He's the Chief Exec of the Albert Kennedy Trust. It's a national LGBT youth homeless charity. And like many of the young people he now helps, his coming out was hard and his family were far from understanding. And after coming out of a coma in 2016, he realised who his true family really were.
When I was in hospital, it was just a stream of LGBT people coming in and out. I think the whole ward were a bit like, it felt like a pride parade on some days. You know, different people coming in to see me, coming in to look after me. And I just thought, well, this is my family. So in a way, in 2016, I looked back on my life. I had a moment to look back on that coming out moment. And I thought, I did it the right way. I ran away from home and created a queer family. And that queer family are the people that are here when I really need them.